Hey everybody, welcome to the Wellman's Podcast. I'm really excited about this episode. I'm with a good friend of mine, Jessica Coggins, also known as the Healthy Hippie. You can find her at thehealthyhippieblog.com. Check her out on Instagram. Brian and I are excited about this podcast because Jessica's had some personal experience with dealing with food intolerances, food allergies, and that's basically what we're going to talk about here today is how to kind of steer the course without making too many wrong turns in regards to food intolerances, food allergies. Anyway, Jessica it has a bachelor's of science in psychology, has a passion for helping people, and had a pretty poor relationship with food at one time, or a traumatic relationship with food at one time. And I think all of us can kind of relate to that. So I'm excited to have you on, Jessica. Is there anything else I should add?
I'm a certified health coach.
Yep.
I think that's about it. Yeah.
And people can find you online, right? For help as a health coach.
All right. Yeah. My website has a health coaching tab, so you can schedule sessions with me there.
Okay. And is the best way to find you is it the healthyhippieblog.com? What is the best way?
Yeah, that's the best way. Or you can find me on Instagram too.
Yeah.
The dash healthy hippie, and then it has my website information on there as well.
Yeah, Brian and I both love your Instagram. Actually, check her out on Instagram. You guys will love her.
Absolutely.
So Jessica, give us a little bit of background. What got you passionate about food intolerances, food allergies, and a little bit of your story?
Okay. Well, when I was a senior in college, my sister actually was diagnosed with intolerance for gluten. And so I was actually living in South Carolina at the time, and she was living in North Carolina. So she called me to tell me that, she had been diagnosed, and I was kind of asking her, what she had been experiencing, because, since I wasn't living with her, I didn't know what she had been experiencing with food. So she was kind of telling me, when she ate, what the kind of pains that she was having and all of her symptoms. And I started thinking, wow, that kind of sounds like, what I experienced. And at the time, I wasn't really that familiar with the gluten allergy. So I did some research, and I decided to cut it out of my diet just to see, how it worked and everything. And I started feeling so much better. And then I lost weight, and then I realized later on down the road that I also had a dairy allergy. So cutting both of those out had made me feel so much better. So yeah, it's been great to find out that I was intolerant to those things, and how much it's actually made me feel, as far as, energy wise and everything else.
Yeah, so it just generally made you feel better. And it's interesting to me, I've had a number of patients over the years who've gone from one doctor to the next over the years, trying to find out what's going on with them. And many of them, it's as simple as what you just said. You avoid, certain foods or whatever, and all of a sudden you get better. And they've been on tons of meds, and they didn't start from the basics. And it's unfortunate, right? Until you really know about that. Some people just stumble upon it.
Yeah. Jessica, how did you find your specific intolerances? Because I remember being like allergy tested at my doctor, and I kind of had like a low level reaction to everything. And I see that as kind of common. So how did you find out specifically what are the things that are not so great with you?
Well, first of all, I am a pasta lover. I love pasta. I love bread. So when I was eating gluten.
Welcome to the club.
I was getting gluten, and my stomach would just hurt. And I just thought that was normal to feel like that after you ate. Let me tell you, it is not normal to feel that way.
Yeah, and many people feel like that. Many people think it's normal to go around gassy and bloated. That's just the way they are. I hear that all the time. Everybody in my family's like that. They don't even think it may be something you're eating.
Right. So it wasn't until my sister was diagnosed that I decided to cut out gluten. And at the time, gluten was the only thing that I cut out. So once I started feeling better and I wasn't experiencing as many of those symptoms, I kind of figured out that gluten was definitely something that I was intolerant to. But then later down the road, I started experiencing the same thing with dairy. So that's when I cut that out, and I realized that I didn't. And I'm also allergic to soy, but I didn't realize that until actually probably 6 months ago.
Wow. So it's your own trial and error that really led you to
So actually, Jillian, Keone's wife, helped me with the soy. Yeah. So she helped me realize that. But the gluten and the dairy, I kind of figured out on my own.
Okay. And you were tested before then?
Yeah. I was tested after, I did my elimination diets and figured out that I was allergic to, or not allergic, because that's different, but intolerance to both.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, what the difference is in between those two in a minute. But so this is really interesting. 70% of the American diet is dairy and some sort of wheat-based product, something with gluten in it. You can safely say 70% of the standard American diet consists of that. And one of the things I learned in medical school was, if you think somebody has a food intolerance or even a food allergy, look to the foods that they tend to eat the most. Right. So there tends to be certain foods that we are exposed to day in and day out. And the main ones are, gluten and dairy. And then the other one, I guess the other three I would say is like sugar, soy, and maybe like, and when I say sugar, I'm just saying like refined sugar and junk food, mm-hmm. But sugar, soy, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, is it corn is the other one? Is that the main one? Big five?
Corn, grains, yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about food intolerances and food allergies, and I know this is a big pet peeve of a lot of physicians out there, because a lot of people like me will just kind of just say the two and mix them up without really knowing exactly what is going on there. So what would you say is the difference, or at least in your symptoms, I guess, would be the difference between food intolerances and food allergies?
Well, like food allergies, it's an immune system reaction. So it affects the organs of the body. An intolerance doesn't necessarily do that as much. And a food allergy, it can be, a long range of symptoms. It's more severe.
Yeah.
It can be life-threatening, like celiac disease.
Yeah, I think that's the key.
Food allergy, it's not an intolerance.
Right.
So, intolerance, it can cause a lot of symptoms that can, eventually be, harder for you down the road as far as digestive-wise. But
right.
It's not as life-threatening as an allergy is.
Right. And when in medicine, right, you probably are aware of like the IgE and IgG immunoglobulins, right? And the IgE is the evil immunoglobulin for those severe allergies. And the problem is conventional medicine doesn't really test for food intolerances, right? It tests primarily for food allergies. Right. So when you go, or like environmental allergies. So when you go, what is a standard test? I think they do like skin prick tests or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I've had.
Yeah, so they're not testing for food intolerances. They're testing for food allergies. Right. And like Jessica was saying, food allergies, the evil IgE, can be life-threatening, where you actually get the swelling, the blowing up of the face, the lips, you go numb. If it's real bad, you can't breathe, that type of thing. And those are life-threatening, very dangerous. Where food tolerance just has this, like, I don't know, these very non-distinct symptoms that can be anything, and you really don't know. And a lot of times food intolerances come on like not right away. It comes on after a few days, so you can't really figure out what they're doing. So you don't have a food allergy then, right? Is that what you're saying?
No allergies, just intolerances.
Right.
Yes.
So Keone, you're saying basically a food intolerance, you're not operating at your optimal level. If you're taking that food allergy could possibly result in a medical emergency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. And we already went over the main foods that can cause intolerance, but I think just about just about any food. Wouldn't you say, Jessica, almost any food, or there's some that don't? Almost any food you can have a reaction to.
Right. Well, like we talked about dairy, gluten, soy, all that stuff is the main intolerances. But some people have intolerances to eggs and garlic
Right.
and onion and leafy greens,
Right.
like that. People can be intolerant to.
Right.
It really just depends on the person.
Right. And what's really interesting also, some people can develop allergies right away from certain foods too, and then they'll go away. And that's really crazy to me.
Right.
Also, I remember my grandmother developing an allergy. This is like a nightmare for somebody who's live in the Italian American culture, but got an allergy from tomatoes all of a sudden, like overnight. Yeah, like it broke out in hives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. But Jessica, do you have any thoughts on? Do you think what is it about the food that is causing that, or is it more about the person, or both? And what I'm getting at is like, does it depend on the preparation of the food? Does it depend on how much you're eating?
I don't know that it would be preparation, but as far as like how much you're eating, yeah, I definitely think as far as Americans go, we tend to eat a little bit more than we should sometimes. So, for some people, they can have, if they have like a gluten intolerance, they can have a little bit of gluten and they're fine, but they eat too much, and that's when the problem is.
Yeah, so it's a dose thing a lot of times, which makes it even harder to figure out too, right? Because maybe at one point you didn't eat that much or whatever.
Exactly. Well, and I try to explain to my clients that essentially an intolerance is when the food is it's fermenting, and then it's when you gas and then you experience other digestive issues.
Right.
So with an allergy, you will not have these. I guess you'll have less intense symptoms. Well, more intense symptoms with an allergy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I feel like with allergies too, that they'll come on a lot faster than intolerance as well.
Yeah, they can come on suddenly where you'll
immediate.
know something is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'll never forget, and sometimes they'll come on like if you eat a food that shellfish is notorious for this.
Mm-hmm.
So a little story on me. I had some, what was it, scallops one time. I've never been allergic to scallops, never had an issue with scallops at all, had them before, but for whatever reason, these scallops from wherever they came from, right away after I ate them, I became very itchy in just certain areas of my body, and and I'm telling you, and I knew that's what caused it, and it lasted for like months on end. Like every night,
wow.
I was just like, and it was like this itching that was just crazy, like unreal. I didn't get any of the breathing issues or anything, but I bring that up because if you've been exposed to something and you get a little bit of a symptom, it's usually for allergies. It's usually the second exposure that can be the one that is really dangerous, not so much the first one.
Mm.
So you just have to be aware of that. So
why would that last for a long time, Keone? Versus,
I can't answer that, but I have all these kind of weird stories with my patients where it's a sudden thing and it goes away quickly, or that it just lasts for a while. It just may have been something in that stuff, and that's why I asked you, Jessica. Like, it's always interesting to me. I have patients from Europe who, or people who have a gluten intolerance here in the United States, and then go to Europe and don't seem to have a problem with the food. It's always interesting to me what's going on there.
Oh yeah, and I've talked to people that have experienced that as well. They can't eat gluten here, but they'll go to Italy and they can eat all the bread they want, and it doesn't really bother them. I feel like that has a lot to do with the way that they preserve things here.
Yeah. Okay. And how they're processing and whatever that means. So it even goes further to me. So is there like, is it a spraying thing? Is there some type of chemical in there that can be making it worse? I think all that can play a role or add to the total load of the person, where after a while your body can't take anymore and you express certain symptoms. But what are the symptoms? Be specific. What are the symptoms that most people complain about with food intolerances? What are they actually experiencing?
Bloating, is a big one, and then some people experience migraines and headaches, hives, even IBS, and nobody wants that. And then if eczema in young children is actually, happens too, especially with dairy. I feel like that can cause it. And then, if you let it go on, it can cause major digestive issues down the road. But I feel like, there's a different symptom for every person with every intolerance, because I have intolerance for gluten, dairy, and soy, and all of my symptoms are different for each one. So it really just depends on the person.
Right. And you have to really work to flesh that out to see.
Right.
See what that is.
With soy, it'll feel like my face is burning from the inside out, but I don't experience that when I have gluten or dairy.
Right.
Now, is that common with individuals with a soy allergy? Kind of that facial burning?
I feel like I don't know about soy, but I know with dairy, I've had a lot of people that experience that with dairy. I don't experience it, but I've talked to a lot of people that do.
Okay, so the symptoms don't necessarily help you kind of select what the reason was, right?
No, I feel like that just fits on the person.
Okay.
Right. So, Jessica, have you done any testing for that? Have you actually done the IgG food intolerance testing type stuff? You haven't done it. So you basically did a food elimination diet to figure this stuff out. Yeah, I think that's the gold standard, but I also think you have to be vigilant. It's kind of hard. It can be difficult to do that, especially when you're used to eating,
it's taken me
dairy.
several years to figure out all of this. So I would definitely recommend, if you feel like you have an intolerance, to go and get tested for it. But for me, it's just been a process.
Right.
Now, do they test for the intolerance the same way they test for an allergy? Because Keone, I had a very similar situation to you. One time I'm at my dad's, I eat some type of shrimp. 20 minutes later, I'm broken out in hives like I've never seen before. Never ever happened again either. I've had shrimp before, after that, never happened again. So is it do you get tested for an intolerance the same way you get tested for an allergy?
It's two different. It's really different. Two different tests, and it goes back to those immunoglobulins that are being stimulated, right? So we talk about the IgE, and actually, Jessica, this is a better question for Jillian than anything, but because she's our go-to for both me and Jessica, our go-to expert on digestion. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but I'm thinking IgE, that's the evil immunoglobulin. That's the thing that where you're doing the skin prick tests and that type of thing. The intolerance stuff is most of the time it's like it's a blood, more of a blood test. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and basically with this test, you have all these panels of foods. This is what's difficult about this test is you can be allergic or have an intolerance to eggs, but how is the egg prepared? You see what I'm saying? So it could be, is it raw egg? Is that what they're testing? Are they testing cooked egg? Are they testing, scrambled eggs with butter mixed in it? Like, it's very hard to flesh some of this stuff out.
And there's no discrimination in the testing?
Well, some tests do discriminate, and you have to really, if you're going to get this done, you have to make sure that you're looking at a test that looks at a bunch of different foods, but also looks at how these foods are prepared and how they're done, and if you're reacting. But here's the other thing, Jessica, I don't really use it that much in the clinic anymore, and I'm not sure Jillian uses these food intolerances tests anymore. Because I think they can get confusing. I don't know if they're really telling you a whole lot. I think what you did with the elimination thing is better, because what happens is if somebody's gut is already compromised, then pretty much you're probably going to be intolerant to almost everything you eat. Right? And so then what do you do with that? Do you just say, okay, well, you don't eat, you can't eat? That's not a likely thing to do. I mean, you certainly can fast them for a while, and a lot of times they'll improve with that. But when you do, I guess the thing that you get from that is when you do a food panel with 100 foods on it, and you light the whole thing up, and you're like intolerant to 70 foods, then all that's really telling me is that you have, the layman's term, leaky gut. how would you explain leaky gut, Jessica? What does that actually mean? Because I know MD, when I say that word, they just roll their eyes at me and think I'm nuts. But
I would just explain it as, just a major digestive issue, and you experience, a lot of symptoms of food intolerances when you eat a lot of different things. If you're experiencing that with a lot of foods, then you probably have an issue.
And I think that's a good layman's way to say it, because it's just like, okay, every time you eat, if you're getting gassy and bloated and getting weird pains and headaches, and
that's not normal.
Yeah, it's not normal. Or you have these weird skin symptoms that, you're constantly running to the dermatologist and getting steroid creams and stuff like that. That's not normal to have. By the way, it's really always interesting to me that a lot of people with food intolerances also have some sort of skin issue.
Yeah. I actually have psoriasis.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And was diagnosed with that not long after I figured out that I had intolerances. So that is actually common.
Yeah, and do you know why that would be? Why that would be? Because I'm going to answer this for you. But the reason why, or the theory behind, I don't know if this is the reason why, but it's really interesting that from the embryonic stage, our skin on the outside of our body is continuous with our gut. So, and in our skin is where most of our immune system resides, and then in our gut is where most of our immune system resides. So we're constantly sampling the outside environment, right? So if somebody has digestive issues, a lot of times you can see it in their complexion, in their skin somewhere. It's not always the case, but that's at least the naturopathic theory behind that. Right. It's all one. It all comes from one embryonic tissue. And that's where most of our immune system lies. So that's why I always ask somebody who has food intolerances, how's your skin,
And I've noticed that my psoriasis has actually gotten better. The more, the better my gut, it clears up, and I don't really experience it much anymore. But, when my gut was really inflamed is when I was experiencing, a lot of it.
Yeah, and I'd say the same thing. A lot of my patients, same thing. It's like the skin just gets better overall.
Can you talk about that gut inflamed, Jessica? Like what that feels like, what that is?
I would say that it's different for everyone, but I just experienced a lot of bloating and a lot of gas, and I would feel like my stomach was cramping a lot. Okay. And my sister, I know that she has a gluten and dairy intolerance as well, and that's pretty much the same things that she experienced. So yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that a lot of these intolerances run in the? I'm honestly not sure that they run in the genetic tree. Are they passed down via genetics?
That would probably be a better question for Keone. I'm really not sure, to be quite honest.
You know what? I'm really not sure about that either, Brian. I would think there's
probably a good question.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think there is some genetic component to it. I mean, we know, if I'm not mistaken, Jessica, you may know this, but I think like celiac disease tends to run in more people of Caucasian descent, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I know, that's correct. Yeah, and I also know like somebody who is lactose intolerant. It tends to be people more of African and Mediterranean descent that tends to have issues with that. Whereas you won't see that a lot of people of Northern European descent, and it has a lot to do with the exposure over the thousands of years that
Right now, Keone, are those clinical inferences? Or is that it's genetically passed down? Do we know?
No, well, it's genetically. Okay. There's a genetic basis for that. There's definitely, and what's really, this is going off into a whole new topic, but what's really interesting about this, which I find fascinating, is when we start talking about evolution. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're starting to find that evolutionary change is happening much, much quicker than what we thought. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about lactose intolerant. I mean, Northern Europeans, just because of having the constant exposure to dairy and milk, selected for enzymes that help them digest it better. You know.
So at the very least, there's definitely a genetic component to this.
Well, and I think it's so if Jessica could probably has patients like this, but I would think, if Jessica, we hear milk is good for the body, and there's a lot of controversy around that, but again, if I have an African American patient, I'm like, you need to drink your milk, it's like that's not good for them. No. It's not, usually it's not. I mean, if they can, some of them may be able to tolerate it or process fermented milk products and stuff, but many of them will not,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the same thing goes for, a population group that may be intolerant to gluten, mm-hmm. which I, if I'm not mistaken, I think it, like you said, Brian and Jessica, I think it tends to be Northern Europeans tend to be the ones that deal with, or Caucasian deal with the gluten, the celiac disease more than anything. So I think there is a genetic component even to food intolerances. I just don't know if we can say that about everyone. I think it's probably more, like Jessica was saying, more of an exposure thing. If you're eating the same thing day in and day out and overeating, you're setting a bomb off in your gut every meal. Eventually your gut can't take it. But
yeah. So that's something you're definitely taking a look into on the intake forms, both of you, Keone and Jessica. When someone fills out kind of what their daily eating habits are, the commonalities or the things that keep reoccurring are kind of triggering a flag to you guys at the very least. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's just due to the exposure of those specific ingredients, or we're not quite sure?
I don't know. What do you say, Jessica? I think it's due to the exposure.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah.
But it's not just. I think it's exposure to how those foods are processed, and
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the dose, and how we're eating them, and then also how they're hybridized. That like the wheat that we eat today is not the same wheat that we ate 100 years ago.
Sure. So when you say dosage, does the average person who maybe has a gluten intolerance or a food intolerance, do they just cut back on the overall food that they're eating of that type? Is that enough for an intolerance to cut back, Jessica?
I would say it really depends on the person for that as well, because some people are going to have, as far as, different intolerances, some people are going to have a higher intolerance to one thing than they are the other. Mm-hmm. So I would honestly recommend doing an elimination diet first. And then if you think that you can tolerate it, try to ease it back in just a little bit to see how your body reacts to it.
Okay. So when someone contacts you and, they say, I think I have this intolerance to gluten, the first thing you'll recommend is a diet that takes that completely out?
Yeah, I definitely would recommend that first. And then we'll, after that, if they are experiencing, if they're still, if it's getting better, then I would recommend trying to ease it back in to see how they do.
Okay. And getting better means a reduction of those symptoms you talked about, gaseousness, bloatiness, that kind of thing?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, Jessica, what are some of the things that you did to, well, I guess I know you did the elimination diet, which I want you to explain how you did that, but also are there any other things you did or took? Because we hear like things like enzymes, probiotics, gut restorative nutrients. Are there any specific things that you think really helped you?
I definitely eliminated, the gluten cold turkey. And I did get on a probiotic, so I definitely think that helps some. But some people will cut it out for a little bit. I cut it out for about 6 months, honestly, for a pretty long time.
Yeah, wow. That is a long time.
Did you add it back? Did you try to add it?
I did add it back in small amounts, yes.
How did you do when you added it back?
Well,
okay. All right. Because it's interesting to me. Usually there's this whole thought out there. Okay, you eliminate something, that's the offending agent. Your gut should heal, and then when you add it back, you should be okay with it.
Right. Not for me, at least.
Yeah. So and I guess everybody's a little bit different than that.
Yeah.
So, but so you used a probiotic, and you think that really helped?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Do you think 6 months is necessary, or do you have like, you know, when someone comes to you, do you have like a recommended window of time that they restrict themselves from those foods?
I recommend 3 weeks to a month just to
Three
see how
weeks.
it's gonna do. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend 6 months. That's just what I decided to do. Um,
Hmm.
And
because
it's hard. That's hard to do if you
yeah,
That
pull
sounds hard as hell.
it's hard, but I was seeing such good results with it. That's why I guess it gave me a little bit more drive.
Yeah, I guess if you're feeling good, right, you're like, I don't want to go back to the way I was feeling. But if you're not sure if that's the food, and it very well could be, and you haven't noticed anything, it's like hard to do that, especially when the mainstay of your diet is wheat based, which most Americans' diets are.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
eat pasta all the time. See, I would go to a restaurant and I wouldn't even look at anything else on the menu except for the pasta. So that was really tough for me. But
Yeah.
And if someone's trying that restrictive, or they're restricting a specific food intake to see if it is that food that's creating this intolerance, what type of symptoms should they look for? They just look for a maintaining of those symptoms of bloaty, gassy, that sort of thing, to know that it's not necessarily that food.
right, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And you would just suggest that they kind of cycle different options until they find that thing that's making them less gassy or bloaty, and maybe that's the one.
Yeah, yeah, and now that it's a lot easier because there are more options on the market as far as gluten-free, dairy-free, things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Go to.
Yeah, you have a lot of options. Like if you want your pasta, you certainly can get gluten-free pasta. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly
What?
changed in the last few years. A lot of options.
Yeah. Since Jessica, so when we say gluten-free, what are the main things to avoid to be gluten-free? What are the main types of foods? We said wheat.
Yeah, wheat. So you want to. I mean, you need to look. You just need to read the labels. Really,
Yeah.
you know.
A lot of labels will say gluten-free on it.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
and actually, if you're really sensitive to gluten, you have to read the labels, because if
Exactly.
it doesn't say that on there, even though it's a food that you think I don't think oats inherently have gluten in them. But if it doesn't say gluten free and you react to gluten, if those oats are processed in a wheat facility, you're going to get gluten there.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't buy anything without reading the label. So you just gotta read those labels.
It
Right.
will certainly be there if they can make money off of it.
In the label, so you really have to be careful about how you read them as well.
Yeah. So this is one thing, Brian, I've talked about this before. So a lot of things come and go in nutritional science. Like, right now, carbs are the evil macronutrient. When I was growing up, maybe when you were growing up too, Brian and Jessica, I think you guys are a lot younger than me, but
What?
it was yeah, of course. The evil food was fat. Fat is the evil. It's going to do you in. Do you think this is kind of a fad thing, or overblown, or what, Jessica?
As far as staying away from carbs or fat or anything gluten.
Well, no, as far as gluten, like, do you think like being gluten-free is a fad type thing? I mean, is it for everybody? Should everybody be doing it? Should only a few people be doing it? That type of thing.
Well, I definitely think some people are gluten-free and they don't have an intolerance. So, it can be a fad, but I mean, for some people, it really does affect them.
Yeah.
And it's something that they need to steer clear from.
Yeah, I agree. I just think like you see things like I think some people out there just get the notion, gluten-free is a healthier way to be, and
Well, how do you make that distinction?
Will help me lose weight. That things
yeah, right. They'll make jumps like that,
Mhm.
and I think what the distinction is: do you react to it when you eat it?
Exactly.
Does it show up on a test, an objective test to see? Actually, I want to tell both of you guys this. I don't know if you know this about me, Jessica, but I actually got tested for gluten, right? For celiac disease. I did the blood test, so I know it's not the gold standard test. But what came back was gluten intolerance on a stool test. So stool test is another way to do this. But so that's interesting because I never really, I don't tend to be gassy or have digestive issues, but I did light that thing up for gluten specifically. And generally when I minimize it and don't eat it like I used to, I definitely feel a lot better. I mean, there's no doubt.
So you can eat it in small amounts, but
yeah, I could eat it in small amounts and be okay with it. But then the question comes, all right, so if I'm eating in small amounts and I'm doing it every day, am I setting myself up for making a worse situation or making myself more intolerant later on?
Yeah.
that's a possibility. And also, what types of gluten are you eating? Breads that are really processed, pasta that's processed, or are you eating stuff that's more fresh?
Right. Well, that's right, because it may not just be the gluten. It could be the sugar, high sugar content. It could be the binders, like the fillers that a lot of things are putting breads and some of these milk, these nut milks and things like that can definitely affect it.
Right.
So one of the things, and it's interesting to me that you didn't mention this, Jessica, because you just said, no, I didn't. I just did an elimination diet. Well, elimination diet is something that people really can do on their own. They don't need, it's good to have a physician or somebody like yourself walk them through it who's experienced that, who has experience with doing an elimination diet. But an elimination diet really costs nothing. You can do it on your own. And that's, I think, really where you should start. And then when people come to me, I do a history on, okay, well, has there been a big history of antibiotic use, where the gut flora has been, basically annihilated or whatever. And also your immune system can't react to stuff that is broken down completely. So a digestive enzyme can help. Those are simple things that may take care of the problem, but it's a balancing act. Does that mean, okay, well, I can just eat my gluten every day and take my digestive enzyme and be okay? And I would say not necessarily. Like, you want to start with the elimination diet like you did.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then tell me, so as far as eating, not having your pasta anymore, so what
how do you survive?
Yeah, how do you survive? What do you do?
I found some good brands that have good gluten-free pasta, and if I just have to eat that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. So I got gluten-free pasta. I boiled it for 2 minutes and it turned into mush. So so do you have any good?
This is shit, Jessica. How do we do it?
Yeah.
Capello's is one of my favorite brands.
What's that?
Capello's.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. Capello's. Yes.
Capello's. Trader Joe's actually has a good brand of gluten-free pasta as well. That's made with lentils.
Yeah.
So that's good. Yeah. There are several. I know a lot of people like Bonza. It's made with chickpeas.
Yeah, had some of that over the weekend. Delicious.
I can't eat it because I can't digest chickpeas very well, but it is really good pasta.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So you can get that nice al dente feel, a nice chewiness there of the pasta,
yes,
even if it's gluten-free.
Even though you just make believe it's not chickpeas.
Yeah. Well, the downside to a lot of gluten-free stuff out there, not with the chickpeas, is a lot of gluten-free stuff. When you look at the back, the carb content is much higher.
It's sugar too.
Yeah, because you're getting more starch. You're taking the protein portion out of the wheat, so you get more carb in it. So you really want to try to, like you mentioned, if you can find good sources of bean proteins, or I think Capella's is
almond flour.
Yeah, it's almond flour. So there you go. You have nuts, so you're getting a pretty good protein source in there. So it's not like eating a high carb.
Exactly, and it's delicious.
It's delicious and filling. So you don't have to. Yeah. So it's not like you have to eat like 3 or 4 bowls of pasta.
No.
Like your sugar's up way high and go into an insulin coma and fall asleep for the rest of the day, like I've not been known to do.
So Jessica, when you were doing the diet where you would kind of restrict yourself of certain things to figure out what it was, how did you gradually kind of come back to, I guess for lack of a better word, a more normal diet? And then knowing that gluten was a thing, did you just cut out one thing at a time?
Yeah, I cut out the gluten first because at the time I didn't know that I had a dairy intolerance or a soy intolerance. So that's what I cut out first. And so when I was I was still eating dairy and soy when it was gradually putting the gluten back into my diet. But I could tell a difference when I was eating gluten, and then a little bit after that, what I was experiencing. So that's how I figured out that it was definitely the gluten.
Okay. And then, so can you talk a little bit about how you noticed the other things after you had already cut out gluten?
Well, after I cut out gluten, I was eating yogurt every morning.
Okay.
And I started feeling just awful throughout the day. And
like 99% dairy?
It was whole milk. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. But I was so lethargic and I just felt terrible. And so I actually had a personal trainer at the time because I was getting ready for my wedding, and I was talking to him about it. He was like, well, have you ever thought that maybe it's dairy? So he's like, maybe you should cut that out and see, how you start feeling. And so when I started cutting that out, that was really, that and goat cheese was really about the only dairy at the time I was eating. But I cut both of those out. And as soon as I cut those out, I stopped having those symptoms.
Okay. So for someone who contacts you, do you recommend that they cut one thing out at a time, or at the very beginning, do they take like a shotgun approach?
No, you definitely need to cut one thing out at a time, because if you don't cut one thing out at a time, you're not going to know what it is if you cut everything out at the same time.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I guess you start with those foods we mentioned at the beginning, right? Gluten, dairy, soy.
Right. Yeah. The main ones that people
The main
have.
ones.
But yeah, if someone comes to me, I'll find out. I'll get an extensive list of what they're eating, throughout the day, and whatever I think is, the main thing, that I'll have them cut that out first.
Yeah. So do you spend most of your time, is this what you do, walk people through this like process that you went through? I mean, so if people are dealing with like digestive stuff, and then I guess my next question is, so when you do this, coaching them or whatever, and they're not getting better, when do you refer out, or when do you think you need to refer out, or refer to somebody else?
Typically, the first session I get as much as I can, and then we'll go from there. And then I normally follow up with them after about 2 weeks to see how it's going. Within about, 3 months or so, if they're not getting better and I cannot figure out what's going on to them, with them, of course I'm going to refer them, because I don't want to keep charging someone if I can't help them.
Right. Yeah. So you should know something usually it's within a few weeks, but definitely by 3 months.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. One of the biggest symptoms I see with, besides what we mentioned, but I also see joint pain.
Yes.
Right. So I'll see joint pain with that. And the naturopathic, the theory on that is the gut is leaky, and chains of amino acids are going from the gut into the blood. They're not being broken down and chains of amino acids are like partial proteins. So they're not being broken down into their isolated amino acids where the immune system can't react. And then these little particles there's like a molecular mimicry that they can bind to like certain proteins on cells and cause your immune system to look at it as foreign. So a lot of, food intolerances, food allergies, but definitely food intolerances, can turn into diagnosable autoimmune disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there a specific joint that this affects more, Keone, or not so much? Distal or anything like that?
I think the hands and the feet primarily.
So more distal joints?
Yep. I think the hands and the feet primarily. And I think the main organ that it affects, or at least that we see, because it's such an epidemic, is the thyroid. So we see Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune disease. And I think if you have that, you need to get checked, get the thyroid antibodies checked. And one of the things that most integrative docs will do is, if they're diagnosed with some type of autoimmune disease, they do what Jessica's talking about. They talk about eliminating certain things first. So I don't know. Did we do a podcast on thyroid? I think we did a while back, but
I got to say, yes, we're 95 into it. I imagine.
Yeah. But it's not as simple. It can really, if it's not taken care of, it can really turn into other things.
Yeah.
And, and the question has to be asked, why would your body start attacking itself? And a lot of times, because the assumption is your body's going to do the best that it can with the environment that it's in.
Right.
And that's, and you can't heal the body. If you're already in a sick state and you're staying in the same environment and doing the same things, you're not going to heal. You have to change something. And since you're being exposed to food day in and day out, it's a logical place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like as a physical therapist, you really have to get down to the subjective history of finding out just what they're commonly intaking to really discern it from normal joint pain, or not normal joint pain, but joint pain from a musculoskeletal cause to something more sinister like this gluten or a food intolerance.
Yeah. And the food intolerance stuff is really, it's just like, well, yeah, sometimes I wake up with stiff joints. Other times I'm fine,
right. It's tricky.
Yeah. It's tricky. It can be tricky.
Which brings me to, are there objective measures? Like, I understand there's plenty of subjective information that we could gather from a patient to understand that they may be experiencing some of these symptoms, but is there an objective measure where we can see, this level's above 90. They have a food intolerance to XYZ.
Well, besides the testing that's
somewhat subjective, is it not?
Yeah,
like,
no, it
the
is.
Testing I've had is like, well, you welted on your back, man. You're intolerant to all these things.
Right. Well, yeah, to a certain extent it is. But I think what Jessica hinted at the beginning is a lot of people go from doctor to doctor and they run these stereotypical objective measures, and basically they're like, nothing's wrong with you, nothing's wrong with you, nothing's wrong with you.
Right. At which point you're saying, Jessica, that the and you keep referring to it specifically. I'm so sorry, I keep forgetting the name, but the restrictive diet where you cut something specifically out, the elimination diet is the only way to truly tell, hey, it's gluten. Is that correct?
I feel like that's the best way, honestly.
I think it is too. Best all around way, because people can do it on their own. And people, they know their bodies better than anybody else.
Exactly.
And so if you've been to every doctor, you definitely want to do the rule outs. Like, you want to rule out, if you have something really bad and there's autoimmune disease in the family and your symptoms are really bad, you may want to do the conventional stuff. But the non-conventional stuff is what is going to get you well, instead of just like the elimination stuff. Maybe, and maybe even I brought this up at the beginning, is completely fast people for a while also. Do gut restore. Have you done any of that with any of your clients? Have you done any like intermittent fasting, or do you use that?
I don't use it very often. Now it can work for some people, and I don't have anything against it, but with me, I've had a history of migraines. So I have not had a great experience trying to do that. It's not something that I do very well. If someone doesn't have a history of migraines, of course, I'll try that. But I try to be careful with that just because of that.
Yeah. And it can bring on, if you're messing around with your blood sugar and stuff, sometimes that can trigger migraines and other types of symptoms. So, but fasting can help with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. Cause if you're feeding your body things that it just does not digest well, for a long period of time, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah. What else should we hit on? Anything else that we didn't go over?
I don't think so. Other than, people think that if you have an intolerance that you can't eat well, and you can enjoy food. There are ways to do that.
In fact, you could probably eat better than you ever, as far as health goes, better than you ever did if you know what you're doing.
Right. And there's great recipes out there for that. Yeah,
there are. There's tons of books out there for gluten-free living, whole foods living. So that's all out there, and you certainly can eat better. And that, here's the issue, and we were hinting on this. Seeing something labeled as gluten-free does not necessarily mean healthy, right? Exactly. So a gluten-free cookie, Yeah, maybe it doesn't have gluten in it, but you
A lot
know,
of refined sugar.
yeah, a lot of a lot of sugar, right? So over time, it can increase your risk of blood sugar issues and stuff. So that's the thing with marketing. A lot of these things have the gluten-free designation has this halo effect that people will then in their mind go, oh, that's a healthy thing to eat, and
Yeah,
that's not necessarily true.
just because it's labeled like that, like Oreos, they're vegan, but doesn't mean they're healthy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I can be vegan eating French fries all day.
Exactly.
That's
So you
right.
just gotta learn to read the labels.
Yeah.
And there are some great companies out there that really do care about, people with food intolerances that have some great products.
Yeah.
You gotta find those.
Yes. They are definitely out there. Anything else? Brian, you have any other questions?
Not questions, but I can tell you that you can certainly find some of those gluten-free options at thehealthyhippieblog.com. You can for sure find those options there.
Yeah. And I love your posts, Jessica. Your posts are great. So on Instagram, you are the THE, is it space healthy hippie?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Just like the podcast, the fill in the blank.
There you go.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for being on, Jessica.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Thank you. And check out her blog. Again, where people find you at The Healthy Hippie, thehealthyhippie.com.
Thehealthyhippieblog.com.
Thehealthyhippieblog.com. So be sure to check her out. I found it was very relatable. I enjoyed reading your about me and the different parts of the different restaurants that you were finding and whatnot. So it's very interesting. So people go check that out.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being on.